Hello ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the show. On today's episode, I will be targeting some very shallow skinny water spring black bass from the banks of New Hogan. Unfortunately today I ended up arriving at the lake a little bit on the later side, so those shallow water bass had been targeted quite heavily by a handful of anglers already. So with that being said, I will be shaking a worm today because unfortunately being here late, these fishes had received quite a bit of pressure. What saved me today was throwing this 5.8 Neko rig. A Niko rig is composed of a weighted end on a wacky style worm, and I will fish this on a medium spinning setup. I have here my Shimano Zodius medium with a 3000 side Shimano Vanford, and I have a 20-pound braid to 8-pound fluorocarbon. My preferred type of worm is the Jackal Flick Shake, and I will use a wacky style O-ring to attach my wacky style hook. All I will do is cast this bait out parallel to the bank. Then when it hits the water, I will open the bail and slowly feather the line out until the bait hits the bottom completely. Then I will close the bail and begin to shake this bait. It is spring now, so I don't have to go with a very slow shake, and I can actually work this bait very similar to how a shaky head will work. The biggest advantage to fishing a Niko rig over a shaky head or a Ned rig is I could present a much larger profile. These fishes had been hit quite hard because with the golden mussel closure, this lake hadn't received the same kind of restriction, so there are quite a few anglers out targeting black bass at this reservoir already. However, I know I can still pick apart a handful of fishes that are here in the shallow water. I am targeting water this time of year between 2 to 5 feet, because I know that there will be a first wave of some smaller male fish that will move out onto this hard bottom structure. This reservoir is much better known for its striper fishing, and I have filmed here in the past about the striped bass. However, with the golden mussel closure, a lot of bass fishermen had moved their venues to this reservoir, so a lot of these early shallow water bass had been hit pretty hard in the last few days. That's okay though, because this time of year, the bank angler can still have quite some success. I'll always come rigged here with some power fishing technique and some finesse technique just in the event something like this happens today. Now as for the water clarity, this reservoir stays relatively clear. It doesn't let out a whole lot of water and it doesn't get quite a bit of inflow. I ended up getting bit, and just as I expected, I knew that there was some fishes near the bank. This is quite possibly a spotted bass based on the way it's fighting. This reservoir does have the trifecta of black bass species. However, I tend not to catch all trifecta in the early spring, because the spotted bass tend to be the much more active species in the early spring than the other two species, such as the largemouth or the smallmouth. This is a very small spotted bass, but I'll take what I can get, considering that there were already quite a handful of anglers beating the shallow. This is a small little cookie cutter spotted bass, quite common around my area here in Northern California. I'll show him to you guys real quick and I'll let him go. Thanks for playing, dude. Now, as for the area I am targeting, the reason I am targeting the shallow, despite the water being clear and not very warm, is because as spring quickly approaches, these black bass will look for hard structure. It doesn't matter whether or not it's a few feet or so, as long as it is hard structure, these fishes will move on to this hard structure. I tend to stay away from mud or fresh vegetation at this reservoir, because I noticed that in the early spring, as this lake rises, most of these black bass will feed heavily on crawdad that get flushed out from their holes. This reservoir has a huge shad population. I ended up getting bit, and exactly as I expected where the fish would be, this fish was probably in about maybe 2 feet of water at most. The black basses at this reservoir will alternate their diet between the threadfin shad located at this reservoir along with crawdads in the early spring. However, I find that my best successes in the early spring tend to be these black basses that have moved onto the hard structure to feed on crawdads. Now, as for how do I know they're feeding on crawdads? Most of the time when I catch these black basses, they'll have the little crawdad antennas poking out of the back of their gullet, or the top of their teeth will be all stained red from eating the Louisiana swamp red crawdad. To my surprise, this was actually a largemouth bass. I tend to catch spotted bass and smallmouth bass first in this reservoir prior to the largemouth bass showing up. As the telltale sign of feeding on crawdad, all his top of his jaw is stained red, telling me that he's been feeding on crawdad quite heavily. I'll show him to you guys real quick and I'll get him back in the water. This is a gorgeous little spring largemouth bass. I'll let him rest up a bit and then I'll let him go. Thanks for playing, buddy. Off you go. Now in this current situation, there were some very skinny water in front of me and it was super clear. However, I noticed that there was a pod of spotted bass roaming around in this shallow clear water. I'm going to cast above this pod and I'm going to try and tempt one of the fishes to bite. These fishes were getting hit pretty hard earlier in the morning, but as the boaters left, I decided to give it a try. The Neko rig is also a very great bait to sight fish with. I ended up getting bit and I knew that I caught one of the bigger fishes out of the pod that was in this skinny water. However, a lot of time when I catch one of the fishes from the pod in the skinny water, it will often spook the pod of fishes and I'll often not get another bite. So therefore, I'm just happy that I managed to catch a fish out of the group of fishes that was here. The air temperature may still be cold, but the water temperature is warming up day by day. Today I have water temperatures in the low 50s, but that's all it took to get a handful of these first wave of shallow water bass to start moving onto hard structure as the lake rises. This is a very nice spotted bass for this area. It's another little cookie cutter nonetheless, but I'm glad I managed to catch a handful of fishes today. I'll show him to you guys real quick before letting him go. These early spring bass are so vibrant and full of colors. I think they're at their prettiest this time of year. Thanks for playing, buddy. Off you go. Now, as for the sun is setting, I decided to make one more cast into this shallow skinny water to see if I could tempt another fish to bite. I noticed that there were a handful of cruising fishes in this very skinny water, but they were rather skittish from a lot of guys earlier beating this water. The Megabass 110 rip bait is the preferred bait to throw among anglers in this area, so these fishes were getting hit quite heavily with a 110. So I decided that I was going to shake a worm, and thank God I brought the pack of worms with me, because other than that I was going to do the same thing as those other anglers. I ended up tempting one of the fishes to bite, and this was actually a largemouth bass to my surprise. I thought most of these fishes in this skinny water were going to be either spotted bass or some smallmouth bass. But knowing that there are some largemouth bass moving up into the shallow, I was quite ecstatic because that means soon enough, if the lake stabilizes, I'll be able to target catfish and carp. This is a very small largemouth bass, but I'm just happy to catch something today. Despite the angling pressure that I've noticed, this lake has begun to take on. This largemouth bass still has a tint of his winter colors, but nonetheless I am happy to catch him. I'll show him to you guys real quick before returning him to the water. Earlier in the season, I really do like to target some largemouth bass because it is a change of pace from the monotony of winter fishing. Thanks for playing, buddy. Off you go. Overall, it was just a great day to be out on the water. I'm just glad to land a handful of black basses today, despite the angling pressure. I'm glad to know that spring is here, and now there will be great fishing opportunities ahead of us. Thank you guys for watching, and until next time, tight lines, y'all.